believe in the ripple effect.
What's up? What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Ricardo Brendas, also known as Ricky Bryant. And a great episode for you today. Today we have returning guest. He's an author, journalist, podcaster, Nick Bryant. He was on the Ripple Effect Podcast way back in the day on episode 152, and we talked a lot about his book, The Franklin Scandal, a story of power brokers, child abuse, and betrayal. And it's a great book. He's also wrote other great books like The Confessions of a DC Madam. And we do cover those books and just the topic of child trafficking and pedophilia in the realm of the elite and in politics and how big of an issue this really is. And we go into many other topics and many other stories related to this. But please, if you didn't listen to the episode 152 of the Ripple Effect Podcast with Nick Bryant, go back, listen to it. You can go on my website, rippleeffectpodcast.com. On the right-hand top corner, you'll find a search bar where you can put in just the word Nick, and he'll come up. You'll find that episode, and you can check it out. And we do reference Jeffrey Epstein because a long time ago, before Jeffrey Epstein was a household name, and before it was acceptable and much more likely for people to be open-minded to the idea that politics and the elite could be connected to pedophilia and child trafficking, people like Nick Bryant and shows like the Ripple Effect Podcast were already bringing up people like Jeffrey Epstein. So please support his work, support this podcast, of course, also if you can, so we can get this information out there and keep bringing you important conversations that other shows and other journalists aren't talking about. Also, check out his new podcast called The Nick Bryant Podcast. But of course, before we get into my podcast with Nick Bryant, I need to remind you that this is a Value for Value show. If you get some value out of these discussions, out of the guests I bring to you, out of the hopefully thought-provoking conversations that I spend a lot of time putting together, booking the guests, uploading audio, video, doing all the editing, all that stuff, please consider giving some value back. And there's plenty of ways of doing it. Of course, if you're not in a good financial situation, don't worry about it. You can rate the show, review the show, subscribe to the show on all the platforms we're on: Rumble, Band.video, BitChute, Rockfin, Spotify, iTunes, Odyssey, and many more. Check out the Ripple Effect Podcast for all these links. And believe me, just writing a short review, rating the show, telling your friends about the show, tweeting it, putting it on your Facebook or whatever social media platform you're on does help. Every little bit of support, every little bit of energy invested in helping spread this ripple effect is very much appreciated. But if you are in a good financial situation, if you can afford to help the show, and it doesn't take much, we have a Patreon page where you can support us as little as $1 a month. And like I always tell you guys, if a small percentage of all the people who watch and download the Ripple Effect Podcast donated as little as $1 a month, it would help me reach my goal of doing the show full time. So it shows you that no donation is too little, and everyone who has donated in the past, you have no idea how much I really appreciate that donation. And all my Patreon supporters who donate monthly, thank you so much. And like I said, for as little as $1 a month, you can support us on Patreon and also be a part of our Patreon podcast, which is a podcast I do with my Patreon supporters. So please consider donating as little as $1 a month, and you can be on the next Patreon podcast. If you want to do a one-time donation, we have a PayPal account, we have a Venmo, we also have a crypto wallet if you want some Bitcoin or Ethereum. And if you need a hoodie or a tank top, counting on which part of the world you live in and what the temperature is, please check out the Ripple Effect Podcast merch.com, where you can get mugs for your warm coffee. You can get cups, you can get tank tops, hoodies, kids' clothes, tons of different logos and designs to pick from. You'll get the merch quickly. It's really inexpensive, and you can get that piece of clothing that you might want or need and support the Ripple Effect podcast at the same time. Also, remember, if you like the music you hear in the Ripple Effect podcast, please check out Theory 6. It's my solo music project. You can find Theory 6 and a theme song to the Ripple Effect podcast called The Ripple Effect on all the places you can download and stream music, Pandora, Spotify. So please check that out. And of course, we have some sponsors. Maybe one of the most important ones is Content Safe. They're the ones who help me get my videos on all the video platforms that you can find the Ripple Effect podcast on. Saves me tons of time. So if you're a streamer, podcaster, YouTuber, and you want to find a convenient way of getting your videos on all the video platforms you're on, check out Content Safe. Talk to Matt. Let him know you're a listener of the Ripple Effect podcast, and he'll hook you up. And he'll sync all your channels together and save you hours and hours and hours and hours of time. Another one of my sponsors is Richard Grove's University of Reason. If you're at a crossroads in life, if you feel like you're a hamster on a wheel just running in place, just check out the University of Reason and the autonomy courses. It might be the thing you're looking for to help change careers, expand on some skills, learn some new skills, connect with the community. And if you guys have never heard of Richard Grove, please check out the Grand Theft World podcast or go to my website, rippleeffectpodcast.com, look up Richard's old appearances on the Ripple Effect podcast and learn more about Richard. He's one of the smartest people I've ever met, and he has helped a lot of people find their path and help them with their journey in life. So please check out the University of Reason, where you can help yourself and support the Ripple Effect podcast at the same time. My last sponsor is one of my favorite. It's Element Electrolytes. I use this stuff every day. I actually use it way before it was a sponsor of the show, and I've been a fan of the guy who created it, Rob Wolf, for a long, long time. He's just a OG in the paleo and keto community, and he created a product that we all needed and didn't really exist in the world. There's plenty of ways to hydrate yourself. You can go to a grocery store, go to a convenience store, find things with electrolytes, but typically there's not enough electrolytes to make a difference, or there's tons of artificial sweeteners and flavors. This doesn't have any of that. This only has the stuff you need. It's sweetened with the stevia leaf. It won't kick you out of keto, won't kick you out of ketosis. It won't affect your fasting. And it's a healthy, delicious way of staying hydrated. And as you guys know, when you're fasting, we're doing keto, paleo, carnivore, whatever diet you're doing, you can struggle to stay hydrated, which can lead to headaches, muscle fatigue, low energy, brain fog, and much, much more. So please check out Element Electrolytes. Use a link in the show description or on my website, rippleeffectpodcast.com, and you'll get a free gift with every purchase. And when you use that link just once for 12 months, every time you purchase Element Electrolytes, you will support the Ripple Effect podcast. But if you want to keep getting that free gift, use that link every time you purchase Element Electrolytes. They also have chocolate flavors if you want to add it to a warm drink. And it's a great way of having a coffee and staying hydrated at the same time and adding some flavor to your coffee. Finally, that's it. Enjoy this amazing conversation with journalist, author, podcaster Nick Bryant. Also remember to check out our Telegram group chat, also found on the Ripple Effect podcast website. Thanks, guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
I believe in the ripple effect.
Where are you out of, Ricky? Where do you live?
I was originally born in Portugal, and then came to what we call Little Portugal, this town called Ludlow, Massachusetts, which is full of Portuguese and Polish people. So it's kind of like we're still back at home in Europe, because every butcher shop and bakery is just all Portuguese owned, and so it's yeah. So I live in the East Coast. Yourself, I know you've done a little bit of moving around.
I've been living in New York City for like 27 years.
Okay, but you're not originally from there, right?
No, I'm from Minneapolis.
That's right.
And let me get my chair right. I was in Portugal some years ago, and I did not like the indigenous food. I mean, I don't want to disparage your background or anything.
It's all right. No, I'm not easily offended.
But I ended up going to this Chinese restaurant next to the hotel quite a bit.
Really? So do you remember what you ate?
They served me this thing with fish and all kinds of other, because whenever I'm traveling, I try to eat like the indigenous food. And
Yeah. I'm the exact same way. Like I have friends from all over the world. I have friends from Lebanon, Estonia, El Salvador, Guatemalan friends, and it's like if we ever go to a restaurant that's like, okay, this is a Lebanese restaurant, it's like I want to drink Lebanese wine, I want to have Lebanese food, I want to eat and drink what you guys do. You know, we have a good a German restaurant nearby too called the Munich House. Same thing. We go there. I'm like, I don't want to. I'm not going there to have a burger. Like I want to eat what you guys eat. You know. So to me, it's like I love embracing the different cultures and the way they make their foods and all that stuff. But the thing about Portugal is that so southern Portugal and kind of central Portugal, it's almost like as you go more north fish is less of a part of our diet, and then it's more meats, you know, pork and beef and whatnot.
Mhm.
So I was born in Chaves, which is northern Portugal, and so even though fish is, we still eat octopus on Christmas. It's just one of those traditions. For some reason, Portuguese people eat octopus on Christmas, and but it's not a huge part of our diet. And we, you know, a lot of European cultures, and probably not just European, probably many cultures, when you're poor, you find interesting ways of using unique foods. You know, like we have this dish where we use like literally every part of the pig. You know, you have pig ears in it, pig feet, you know, all this stuff because they didn't throw anything out because they're farmers. You didn't have unlimited amounts of money and resources. So you would try to utilize every part of the pig. So it's you know, you will find foods like that in the Portuguese culture. But if you have like beef or steak or pork, like the sausage, we call it chouriça, really good, you know, it's but you could end up ordering one of those weird Portuguese dishes that will definitely turn you off from the food, you know, but it's not all we eat.
What got me was pulverized sardines in the morning in lieu of butter. I had a hard time with that. Putting pulverized sardines on my bagel.
Yeah, it's funny. My dad loves sardines. I'm the same way. Like I don't get it, you know. Like there's certain things that you know. But it's funny. This kind of goes into I guess we'll find a way to kind of get into the subject of hand from here. But it's amazing culturally, like what becomes normal to you. Like I've had my father look at like other. He's very unlike myself, where I'm very adventurous. I'll go to all different types of restaurants and try. I want to try everything, and whatever the weirdest thing is, put it in front of me. I'll at least give it a try. And my dad's like a creature of habit, where he likes his traditional Portuguese food, and and it's funny because he'll look at other cultural foods that might be a little weird, and he'll be like, "Oh, that's disgusting. How do they eat that?" And I'm like, "You do realize like that's exactly what they say about some of the stuff you eat, right?" And it's just it's funny how we just become like what you grow up on. That's the norm, and that becomes completely acceptable. And it's not because you think one thing's or it's not because you can define one thing as disgusting or not disgusting. It's all based on like what you grow up eating and what you get used to.
So, what do you want to converse
Well, yeah.
about?
Well, last time, so we could start off right now. Maybe I'll even leave the chit chat in the beginning. Some people like the chit chat, the small talk, but so I might leave that in. But I know last time you were on, it was quite a long time ago. I actually just looked it up before we went live to it was episode 152, and I'm not sure what year that was, but I know I'm in the 450 or 400s and something. So it was quite a long time ago. And the topic, you know, one thing that I think many of us loved about your work is that the topic was quite taboo at the time. And the Franklin scandal was a story that kind of exposed a bigger problem, right? Like that this is kind of seeped in the world, all over the place in the world, in Hollywood. And you know, I've had somebody from the documentary Open Secret on, which kind of talks about you know, the problems in Hollywood and the pedo parties, underage kids in hanging out with adult men in Hollywood, and how that's kind of been accepted in that culture, and to kind of bring it back to culture, like it becomes a norm. And that's kind of very similar to food. see that in Hollywood where it's almost accepted and nobody talks about it until it's okay to talk about it. Like when you see Weinstein get arrested, now people are like, yeah, we kind of knew something was fishy. We knew some, but it's like, but nobody says anything until he gets arrested and it's okay to talk about it. Same thing with Cosby, same thing with like, so, there's so many examples of this, but it seems to be a part of politics, a part of, so many aspects of our lives. But, I know, like I said, it has been a while since last time you were on. So maybe it, and I'm hoping since then I have some new listeners. So for the new listeners who maybe missed the last time you're on and maybe aren't as familiar with your work, but are intrigued with this story and then just your origin story and how you got, what led you to go down this rabbit hole. Can you give a brief background of how, basically what you did before the Franklin Scandal book, and then what led you down that rabbit hole, and then we'll move on. I know you do a podcast now, which I also want to promote and let people know about, and we'll go into wherever the conversation takes us from there.
Sounds good. So my name is Nick Bryant, and I'm a writer and an investigative journalist. I initially was in academia for 5 years, and I found that unsatisfying. And I ultimately moved to New York City 27 years ago, and I started a freelance journalist career. And for a number of years, I covered science conferences, and that was like my steady gig, but I would always be looking at other stuff to write about. And in 2002, I was pitching an editor at Rolling Stone Stories, and he said, "We want dark stories. Give us the darkest stories." So I kind of threw my hands up in the air and said, "Satanists, Nazis. I mean, how dark you want to go?" And he said, "Nazis." No, he said Satanists. And I saw that little bulb go off. So I had a simple plan. I was going to meet up with some Satanists, go to a black mass, write an article, and then it would be a done deal. And did not think it was going to take too much. I mean, I found most of the Satanists that I interacted with somewhat unctuous, but there's a lot of different types of people that I find unctuous. So as I was, when you're investigating something or writing about something, generally you do research and go down different avenues. And I came across a U.S. Customs report about a cult called the Finders that was seemingly trafficking children. And they had a warehouse in Washington, D.C., but there were two finders that got busted with 6 kids. And they were in a Tallahassee park, Tallahassee, Florida. And the concerned citizen called the police, and the police took one look at them and arrested the 2 guys and indicted them on multiple counts of child trafficking. And then the children were given to Child Protective Services. And ultimately, a search warrant was executed on the Finders warehouse, and there was a lot of strange stuff that was found, including child pornography. So that was kind of interesting, just that, I was reading the document, and that was kind of opening me up to a new world. I'd written a number of things about children's issues, but I've never written about child trafficking before. And then, so I was reading this U.S. Customs report on the Finders and all the stuff that they had come across, and they had come across some really, really malignant stuff. And at the end of the report, it says the CIA has taken over this investigation and there'll be no more investigating. And I was thinking to myself, the CIA, first of all, the CIA isn't supposed to operate domestically. But what are they doing with this cult that is seemingly doing really bad things to children? I mean, why would the CIA quash an investigation into a cult like that? And then that got me down the rabbit hole.
And that's the Finders was one that a lot of people, a lot of people outside the alternative media community didn't really talk a lot about. And same thing with was it a Nexium cult, right? There were some weird links to that too. I've heard people like Jason Burmis, who I know you've been on his show, and he's a friend of mine, talk about quite a bit. But there's is this, I mean, this cult thing, how much of this do you think is I mean, is it occultism? Is it satanic rituals? Like, do you think there's any links to any of that stuff to maybe explain the motives to some of this?
Well, with the Finders, we'll never know exactly what happened there, I don't think. A journalist named Elizabeth Voss wrote a 4-part series on the Finders. And she did talk about the Finders keeping children in cages and things like that. And the 6 kids that were found with the Finders, I mean, they were ragamuffins. I mean, they had insect bites and then been bathed in quite some time. And the guys that were with them were in suits. It was pretty bizarre, and that suddenly opened me up to a world that it was like a wormhole to a universe that I'd never experienced before. And I kind of thought I knew how the world worked, generally. I knew that the CIA orchestrated coups, assassinated certain leaders because they were working on behalf of big business, and certain people had threatened to nationalize, certain leaders had threatened to nationalize certain industries. And like with Guatemala, and you had the
United Fruit Company.
Yeah, United Fruit, and they had connections to Alan Dulles, who was head of the CIA. And like in Iran, Mosaddegh, Mohammad Mosaddegh, who was the democratically elected president, he was going to nationalize oil, and then we overthrew him, like we overthrew Arbenz in Guatemala. And the CIA has overthrown a lot of governments because it would get in the way of business. And I thought that, and then the CIA, I mean, and then there was other things that I kind of thought that the CIA did, but that document took me by surprise. And like I said, what was the CIA? Why would the CIA have any kind of connection whatsoever to a cult like the Finders that, as I said, is seemingly doing really bad things to children? And so that opened up my mind to, could this be a pattern with the CIA? And I ultimately went to Nebraska. On the internet, I was reading things about this network in Nebraska, this child trafficking network in Nebraska. And then I'd read a book called The Franklin Cover-Up, which I didn't think was a very good book. And but I mean, and then there was a documentary that got pulled called Conspiracy of Silence. So between all these things, I thought that there had been like a pedophile ring in Nebraska, and that was probably pandering children to affluent people. But I didn't think it went out of Nebraska. I didn't think it was like transcontinental. I didn't think blackmail was involved. I didn't think intelligence was involved. But the internet innuendo said that all these things were involved. So I went there very skeptical. I was skeptical. And once I got there, I spent a couple of weeks there the first time. And I talked to a victim. I talked to someone who'd been a blackmail photographer. I acquired some documentation, and people were so frightened to talk about this. It was like I was doing an expose on the KGB and Stalinist Russia. And I was followed, and at one point, and then on my last night there, I had a death threat. So that, and then at that point, before the death threat, I had come to the conclusion that this thing was not localized to Nebraska or Omaha, that it was in fact a nationwide pedophile network that was protected by the federal government, and my mind was certainly open to intelligence connections, which I would find in the Franklin scale, very similar to the what we've seen in the Epstein case.
Yeah, that's the thing with the Franklin scandal is that, so the Conspiracy of Silence, the film that you referred to, you can still find it's a rough, unedited version of it. It's a poor quality, but it was supposed to be released. Was it Discovery or somebody was?
Yes, Discovery was supposed to release it in the UK, I believe in 1994.
Yeah, and then somebody got, and then they didn't end up releasing it. Somebody somewhere got a version of it, a unedited rough draft version of it, uploaded it, and I believe you can still find it kind of roaming around somewhere. But it goes into the whole story, and I mean that story alone. And I know we probably, it's been a long time since last time you were on, but I'm sure we went more into detail on the last time you were on episode 150 or 152. But for people listening who haven't listened to that episode, could you give them just a rough idea of what you uncovered there, and how far down the rabbit hole you went and discovered that this, like you said, it wasn't just something that was localized in that area. It was connected to many other people and many other places.
What I ultimately concluded, and I do believe that I proved this in the Franklin scale, it's a 500-page book. I spent 7 years investigating it. Although Wikipedia and Facebook say it's a fabrication, which is, people have not been able to change the Wikipedia page. The Wikipedia page is locked down by autocratic editors. And I think that that's hurt me probably when I've gone to LA and tried to either sell a docuseries, documentary, or narrative film, because I think people in showbiz in LA, they look at the Wikipedia page. I think they have a number of them that I've met have about as much depth as a kitten's milk saucer. So when, and that's kind of troubled me, because I did spend so many years, and I really did prove it. I mean, I had, it was a huge network. It was bigger than Jeffrey Epstein's network. Jeffrey Epstein's network was in doing pandering children for about 30 years. I think the Franklin network was probably pandering children for about 12 years. And it was, most of the kids either came from near Washington, D.C. or Omaha. And it was run by two pimps. One was Larry King, or Lawrence E. King, and he ran the Franklin Credit Union, ergo the name of my book. And the other pimp was in Washington, D.C., and his name was Craig Spence, and he was a CIA asset who had his house wired for audiovisual blackmail, much like with Epstein. All of his houses were wired for audiovisual blackmail. So King would plunder Boys Town, and that was something else that really troubled me. When Boys Town came up, I had a hard time believing that. Boys Town is the iconic orphanage on the outskirts of Omaha that's supposed to be a utopia for troubled children. And I found out that Lawrence E. King was flying these kids all around. I had like 200 flight receipts at a certain point, and but most of them most of his flights went to Washington, D.C., and they would have the parties in Craig Spence's house, the CIA asset that was wired for audiovisual blackmail. So what I uncovered was this huge nationwide pedophile network, and that did have links to some dark, malignant corner of U.S. intelligence, very similar to Epstein. And it was ultimately covered up by the Department of Justice and the FBI, and then also state authorities too. And I don't know if your listeners know what a grand jury entails, but grand juries, there were 3 grand juries in the Franklin case. There was 1 grand jury in the Epstein case. With grand juries, a special prosecutor is chosen, and he's responsible for showing the grand jurors the evidence that he deems that is right for the case. And grand jurors are just people that have shown up for jury duty. They're not exalted. I mean, a grand jury, it sounds like the gods of jurisprudence have spoken, but a grand jury is just people that have shown up, and then the special prosecutor shows them evidence that he deems is relevant to the case. And grand juries have been notoriously easy to corrupt. There was a New York judge that said a special prosecutor of a grand jury could get a grand jury to indict a ham sandwich. That's a famous quip about grand juries. So there were 3 grand juries that were used to cover up the Franklin network. 2 were in Nebraska. 1 was a state grand jury. 1 was a federal grand jury. And they were very corrupt. I've got the transcripts to the state grand jury. And in my book, I have just the Franklin scandal, I have a chapter dedicated to how corrupt that grand jury was. And the federal grand jury in Nebraska was just as corrupt. And there was also a federal grand jury in Washington, D.C. that covered this up. So this required 3 grand juries to cover up. And it's not, as I said, it's not that difficult to cover something up in a grand jury. You just have to find a corrupt special prosecutor. And the Department of Justice is filled with corrupt people. And like in the Epstein case, there was a state grand jury that found that Epstein hadn't molested a single child. So when it comes to grand juries, they're notoriously easy to corrupt. But the size of the Franklin network, that it required 3 grand juries to cover up, as opposed to the Epstein network that required just 1, kind of gives you an indication that it was a much bigger pedophile network.
And so I've heard you say this on other interviews, and you probably said it last time you were on this show too. To cover up something like this, it had to go to the highest levels to cover this up. And because like you've said in the past, like the CIA is not going to do this, or the FBI is not going to cover anything up unless they're told to, and somebody above them. Who do you think was covering this up, and why do you think that was it just sick people with fetishes, or was this actually an operation where there were attempting to control, blackmail people, politicians, people, powerful people in powerful positions, and then control them? Or is it what? Or maybe you saw a little bit of both. Maybe it was people with weird fetishes, and also people who were using these weird fetishes to control others.
All the above. So in Nebraska, you had a state grand jury declare that these child abuse allegations were a fabrication. In Nebraska, you also had a federal grand jury declare that these child abuse allegations were a fabrication. And when you get into the federal system, it's a U.S. prosecutor, U.S. district attorney that oversees grand juries, like he oversaw the federal grand jury. And there was a U.S. district prosecutor or a Washington, D.C. prosecutor who oversaw the trial, who oversaw the grand jury in Washington, D.C. And like with Epstein, U.S. Attorney Alexander Acosta was the one that gave Epstein his sweetheart deal, where at that point, the local law enforcement knew about 23 victims. And Epstein was given 18 months finally. Now we're talking U.S. attorneys here. So we're talking a U.S. attorney in Nebraska, a U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C., and a U.S. attorney in Florida. Now, in our government system, there's only two people that can tell a U.S. attorney to back down or to stand down. And one is the president, one is the attorney general. So these networks, both Epstein and the Franklin network, were covered up at the highest levels. The strings were pulled at the highest levels. And Alexander Acosta, who covered up the Epstein network, the U.S. attorney, he said that he was told to back away from Epstein because Epstein was intelligence and it was above his pay grade. Now, when you get into the blackmail side of it, Franklin deployed blackmail, and I'm convinced that Epstein also deployed blackmail. And so what was being protected was not a bunch of pedophiles. Well, I mean, they were also protected, but I think what was being protected is a system of blackmail that operates our country. And most people are very naive to that, but I do think that it was actually covering up a system.
Yeah, and that would explain all the mysterious deaths in regards to this topic. When you look at the investigator that had the mysterious death, who was looking into Franklin scandal, I'm forgetting his name, but I know you reference his work quite a bit.
Gary Caradori.
Yep, him and his mysterious death. You wrote a book on the DC Madam. She had a mysterious death. I remember reading a story a while ago. Now I don't remember the exact details, but it was some attorney or somebody that in Pennsylvania that was potentially looking into the Penn State scandal before it went public, and then he had a mysterious disappearance. And then, are you familiar with this?
Yeah, that was Roy Greikar, and his car was found abandoned, and his computer was found near. I think it was either a river or a lake. And I did talk to someone in that office who worked under him, an assistant prosecutor. And she told me that she definitely felt that a network was being covered up and that her boss, Roy Greikar, had been murdered.
That's wild. You know, and that's the thing about this topic. It's I've unfortunately have many episodes on topics, this topic and other related topics, and it's so, I've had Craig Solomon Sawyer, who did the film Contraland about child trafficking. I've had the filmmaker Memory Hold, who doesn't use his real name because he goes down these rabbit holes and does documentaries exposing a lot of this stuff. I mean, so many people on to talk about these type of things. Same thing with the guy from the Open Secret documentary, and Whitney Webb's been on a bunch, and it just, to me, it almost seems like you're saying, like it's everywhere, and it's like a open secret is really the best way of describing it. It's a open secret where everybody kind of knows it's happening, but it's hush hush. I mean, I'm sure you've seen some of the artwork that some of these, Podesta and some of these other people have at home. I mean, it's disturbing. It's weird. And then when you find out that there's all these links to politicians in regards to child trafficking, I mean, Dennis Hastert, who is the longest running Speaker of the House, his past, and I don't know if he ended up doing any time for
He did do some time. Dennis Hastert is a good example. He was a predator going back probably 40 years since he was coaching wrestling at a high school. And he had a meteoric ascent. He was the Speaker of the House from, I believe, 1999 to 2006, and he had a long history of molesting underage boys. And constitutionally, he was the third most powerful man in the country. The Speaker of the House, he was Speaker of the House, and that is the third most powerful, constitutionally, it's the third most powerful man in our country. After the, if you knock off the president and the vice president, the Speaker of the House becomes the president. So with him, you had, and actually the FBI was aware of his shadow life, according to a woman named Sibel Edmonds. And she was a whistleblower at the FBI, and she talked about Hastert going to a condominium, I believe, or a house in Chicago for immoral activities, something to that effect. But that was completely squashed. And Hastert was like a strong arm artist in Congress. I mean, he really strong armed people, and he was a big supporter for the Iraq war that was essentially predicated on lies. But it's interesting. He ultimately got busted in a very strange way. And I don't know why the feds went after him. He was getting blackmailed by one of his victims, and the FBI could have easily gone to one of the victims and said, you know, if you don't stop blackmailing this guy, we're going to arrest you. But no, they went after Hastert. And I eventually got to a blackmail photographer for the Franklin network, and I asked him, how does this work? And he says, it's like you're on a yacht, and it's a beautiful day, and you can have anything on this yacht that you want. But if you decide to get off the yacht, the people on the yacht are going to make sure you drown. Now, Dennis Hastert decided to get off the yacht, and I don't know why. I think it might have been his greed, because he was making a lot of money, and he was doing a lot of business with Turkey. Turkey might have had him compromised too. And the Department of Justice and FBI did a preemptive strike. I have no idea. But Larry Craig is another one. He was in Washington, D.C. for about 25 years. He was a U.S. representative, and then he became a U.S. senator. And he was a hard right-winger, family values guy. And he actually, I think, had the worst voting record on gay rights in the House, or very close to the worst voting record. And he was getting prostitutes male prostitutes from all over. I wrote a book called Confessions of a DC Madam about a guy who ran a gay escort service, and Craig was getting escorts from him. And Kirby Dick made a film called Outrage, and he showed that Craig was getting escorts from people outside of Henry Vincent's escort service. And then he was ultimately busted in an airport in Minneapolis in the bathroom stall. He was tapping his feet, which is a signal to gay people that, you know, so, and there happened to be a Vice Squad cop in the stall next to him. And then he got arrested, Larry Craig, and he was in Washington, D.C. for 25 years, and everybody knew that he was gay. And when it came out, it destroyed his career, it destroyed his family. And that's the thing. Once you have those pictures, you control these guys. And it's funny, I'm from Minneapolis, and I was flying out, and I was sitting on the throne in a bathroom, and someone was smacking their feet against the floor in the next booth. And I thought that they probably had a really bad neurological disorder. So I wasn't hip to that nomenclature. But Dennis Hastert and Larry Craig are two examples of guys that were absolutely compromised.
Yeah, and that kind of reminds me of like the Vatican and some of those cover-ups, because same thing, like it seems like the most anti-gay people are almost being proactive in regards to trying to convince everybody that they're not, they couldn't possibly be gay. And you see that with the priests and all that stuff. It's wild. And you look at Chris Hansen, right? To Catch a Predator. He does a podcast, and he's done a bunch of documentaries and tons of investigative work. I mean, this problem just seems to be everywhere, and it's like the problem that nobody will talk about, nobody wants to talk about. When the Jeffrey Epstein story became, because I actually went back, I got kicked off YouTube in 2020 or 2021 for having people like Peter McCullough on, and Dr. Robert Malone, and Del Bigtree, and all the people that YouTube aren't big fans of. But I started a clips channel, and I was listening to our old episode, and I started uploading clips from old episodes, and the last time you were on was one of them. And I'm in that clip, I think we referred to Jeffrey Epstein, and this was some years ago before he was a household name. And to see the turnaround where, like, now, at the time when you were discussing it, I mean, it sounded like a conspiracy theory, this idea that the elites could be connected to pedophilia and child trafficking. I mean, it sounds like the craziest thing ever. And then it became a household name. Jeffrey Epstein became a household name. He obviously did not commit suicide. I mean, he was obviously murdered. And if I was a betting man, there's a pretty good chance he was murdered. And yet people still seem to disregard the fact that this could be happening and that it could still be happening. Obviously, you've investigated past examples of this stuff happening, but what's your opinion on, is it stuff like this still happening? And if it is, how do you think it's still happening?
Of course it is. I mean, where there's a demand, there's a supply. Pedophiles exist in all social strata, but the pedophiles that we're talking about with Jeffrey Epstein and then the Franklin Network, they were pandered to. I mean, they were on the yacht, and once you're on the yacht, you can have anything that you want. And I first started investigating Epstein in 2012. And I got his black book in 2012. I eventually put it up on the internet in 2015 under the auspices of Gawker. But I came back to New York with Epstein's black book, and I could not sell an article on Epstein. And it's funny, when I'd meet with people and they'd say something like, I talked about the Franklin scandal, and then they would say, well, this can't be going on still. And well, what they were saying, it can't be going on still. Well, they were practicing their denial. Jeffrey Epstein was trafficking young girls throughout the country and actually internationally. So wherever there's a demand, there's going to be a supply, and there's a demand at every level of our society. But the upper echelon, that's completely different. They get away with it. To Catch a Predator is primarily about lower socioeconomic guys, middle class guys that are pedophiles. But if they were in the upper strata, they wouldn't be getting arrested to catch a predator.
Well, I remember Kevin Spacey, and obviously, he I was a fan of some of his work prior to the arrest, and the allegations. But I remember when he did an interview after House of Cards really blew up, and he was talking. They were asking him how realistic it was compared to, like, how politics really worked, and he's like, the only thing that wasn't realistic about House of Cards was how fast they passed the bill. And he's like, and so you look at all the.
And actually, the House of Cards did not have any kind of intelligence people blackmailing other people.
Yeah.
So, and that's what, like with Epstein, the government did everything it possibly could to cover up Epstein, and the media did everything it possibly could. I mean, the media was good at digging up salacious dirt, but that's about it. I mean, a number of those perpetrators were named in a lawsuit, and in the black book that I acquired, the house manager had circled a number of names of the people that were in cahoots with Jeffrey Epstein. And the circled names in a lot of cases matched the names that a victim gave during a deposition. So I wrote an article about Epstein. It's on the Sheer Post, and people have told me it's the most comprehensive article on Epstein. I could not get it published in the mainstream media. And with Epstein, you've got that huge cover up, and like I said, and the media has certainly played along with it. The government is the upper echelon of our government is protecting a system. They're not protecting one pedophile. Although those powerful pedophiles are definitely being protected, but they're protecting a system that deploys blackmail, that is predicated on some dark, malignant corner of our intelligence. I don't want to say like it's the CIA or the NSA. And I'm sure that the vast majority of people at the CIA and NSA don't even know about this. But there is some dark, malignant corner of our intelligence that has been blackmailing people for a long time, and there's no line with them. So that's where I was naive. I thought that you wouldn't use kids. I mean, there has to be a line in the sand somewhere, and that's why I was so shocked about this. Is that dark, malignant corner of intelligence has no compunction whatsoever about pandering children. And I think if Americans really understood that, they would hit the streets. Unfortunately, the media just dug up salacious dirt. I've got a podcast and a website, and we're building another website for Jeffrey Epstein activism. And because the thing is, our government covering up Jeffrey Epstein is and it's known by most people is really egregious. And our government, I mean, in the very least, is aiding and abetting child trafficking. Now, as an individual, would you trust anyone who's aiding and abetting child trafficking? As an American, how can we trust our government that's aiding and abetting child trafficking? I certainly have lost a lot of trust in the government since I started investigating the Franklin scandal in 2002.
Yeah, and what you said is so important. This idea that it's a system, it's a culture, and that's what they're covering up. They don't really care about the individuals. I mean, it's funny, like I was saying before, this stuff's like accepted in those worlds because you look at Hoover, it came out afterwards that he was a cross-dresser and all this stuff. But people knew during his time, nobody talked about it. And you hear about that in the religious circles. I was talking to somebody recently who talked about how back in Portugal, how like there would be whispers of like a priest that was doing something, but nobody would speak out because the priests were at this, they put them on this pedestal that like you'd get in, people would look. You would get in trouble for ratting out and snitching on the priest, and it would look bad, and it's like the kids were almost second-class citizens. I'm like how about being concerned about the children, never mind the priest getting in trouble. But yeah, and the thing is, every political party, I know people from the left like to talk about people from the right that are linked to this, and people from the right like to talk about people from the left, but it seems like everybody is involved. And like you said, it's a cultural thing, and there is no such thing as like a left, right, or, one being more guilty than the other, correct?
No, I mean, if both parties weren't involved, there would have been there would have been carnage in Washington, D.C. Towards the Democrats, and because they were the ones that were primarily getting pandered to with Epstein. And with the Franklin case, it was Republicans that were molesting little boys. Republicans molesting little boys and Democrats molesting little girls seems to be the real partisan divide in our government, unfortunately. But yes, it's both parties are involved. Both parties, our politicians are compromised, and if they're not compromised, when you get to the federal level, If they're not compromised, they were more than willing to make a Faustian pact for the power. Power, as Henry Kissinger said, is the ultimate aphrodisiac. And actually, in Portugal, there was a huge scandal where Portugal's equivalent to Boys Town was getting plundered by upper echelon pedophiles. It's a pretty it was covered pretty extensively in Portugal.
I'm not familiar with it. Do you know, was there a name for the scandal or anybody who's done some good work on it that
I would Google Portugal orphanage pedophile and
all the good words.
yeah.
Jeez. Yeah, that's wild. I haven't heard about that. So I'll definitely have and yeah, and that happens in different. I mean, there's similar stories. I know I've run into similar stories in other parts of the world from other countries. So it definitely isn't exclusive to just the U.S. Obviously, Jimmy Savile in the U.K. and all over the place. Nygaard, right? He was Canadian, I believe. So this stuff does happen everywhere. And then you were talking about the media covering it up. There was that Project, I believe it was Project Veritas who had that video of Amy who worked at ABC News, and it was a hot mic, and she was talking about how they had all this information on Epstein and they wouldn't let her go public with it. And so it's like media's covering it up, the politicians are covering it up. Like who's gonna police them when the same people that are supposed to be doing the policing and the exposing are all covering it up?
Well, it's got to be the American people have to rise up in a grassroots movement. And that is the only way that we're going to be able to save these children from getting molested. And I think it's going to be the only way that we're going to save our country from going off a cliff. When our government has reached a point where it's pandering children and covering it up, that's such a perfidious critical mass that we need to definitely start cleaning that up. And I know that Americans, they're heavily seduced by the television, heavily seduced by sports. And there's a lot of different types of opiates that kind of numb Americans out. And but at a certain point, if Americans want to change their system, and I think most Americans know, whether they're on the right or the left, that something is really drastically wrong with our system. And when the system allows for child trafficking, that's, like I said, it's reached a perfidious critical mass. And the only thing that we're going to be able to do is break away from the shackles of our various opiates and send a loud message to Washington, D.C. that this is unacceptable. There's so much evidence in the Epstein case that should be enough to break it open.
But like you said, people at the highest levels are either involved and that's why they're covering it up, or they're covering it up because it's a cultural thing that they have to keep working and keep alive so they can continue doing whatever they're doing, blackmailing people, controlling people, whatever it may be. I'd love to get your opinion on, there's been a lot of people talking about normalizing pedophilia. You almost see it with these drag queens reading books to kids and this sexualizing or at least bringing these topics to younger and younger kids, have them kind of intrigued with sexuality and all this type of stuff. Do you subscribe to any of that? Do you think there's any of that going on?
I mean, there are, like NAMBLA. There are organizations like NAMBLA that think that pedophilia is okay, but the vast majority of Americans are against child abuse. There's a very small percentage that are pedophiles and behind organizations like NAMBLA.
But don't you think, like, so if the people at the highest parts of government and business and Wall Street, I mean, it seems like everybody's involved. Fashion, like, just take the most powerful people that would be hanging out to build Bilderberg Group, conferences or the World Economic Conferences. Like, if all those people are involved in whatever industries they're in, you can see evidence of pedophilia, child trafficking, all these type of things. Wouldn't it make sense for them to kind of slowly try to normalize it a little bit, if that's something they're into? It would kind of would make sense.
Well, you had Alan Dershowitz write a op-ed for the Los Angeles Times where he said the age of consent should be 15 years old, regardless of how old the individual is. And you've got people like Alan Dershowitz lobbying for that. But I think most people realize that Alan Dershowitz is a scumbag and that he was taking part in this Epstein network. Virginia Giuffre, who said that Dershowitz had molested her, I believe, when she was a minor, she's recently waffled on that. And I don't know, she went up against Ghislaine Maxwell in a defamation suit. She went up against Prince Andrew, and she hung in there tough. But something happened where she waffled on Alan Dershowitz. I don't know what he did to her or what connections he had or who he threatened, but I do believe that was involved.
What's your predictions on the Ghislaine Maxwell story? How do you think it's going to end?
I mean, she's going to get out of prison in 10 years or something. And look at how quick Bill Cosby got out of prison. She's going to get out of prison and she's going to have a lot of money waiting for her. And I do believe that she was told, if you talk, you're going to end up like Epstein. And her trial was so carefully choreographed. The four victims that were called had no idea about the larger network. They had just been molested by Epstein and Maxwell. And unfortunately, that's our Department of Justice. That's a U.S. attorney covering up child trafficking right there. And again, as I said earlier, there's only two people in the country that can tell a U.S. attorney to stand down. One's president and one is the attorney general.
Yeah, and it's such a weird world. I know the call boy story from back in the 80s, and like I'm constantly just trying to figure out, like, is it like a CIA method to control people, or really are the highest levels of people also involved in this, and it's a weird fetish of theirs, and that's what they're covering up? And like you said, it's probably a little bit of both. But yeah, it's a wild. It's almost. Go ahead.
Once you're on the yacht, you can have anything that you want. Once you're on the yacht, once you're compromised, you're pandered to. You whatever fetish you have, if they're children or some of these pedophiles in both the Franklin Network and Epstein Network really liked abusing children. I mean, physically. I mean, I heard about a prime minister who really liked beating up little girls. I mean, that was his thing. I mean, he's a former prime minister, but this guy was head of a country, and his thing is beating up little girls. So those are the kind of people that we're being governed by.
That's wild. I mean, I've heard, I forget who it was, if it was a poker millionaire or whoever it was, talking about how he's had like all the material things. He's traveled to every exotic island. He's had every exotic car. He's done, and he was talking about how, if 1 through 10, how excited you get about something, or, it's really hard to hit 10 when you've done everything, when you have access to all the best things. And it's like, well, what's next, right? And I think about that, and it reminds me of that older horror movie, Hostel, where these kids are being tortured who are traveling Europe, and come to find out it's a bunch of rich people who are paying for these services, and it's kind of, I'm like, I remember when I first watched that film, I'm like, it's believable. I mean, this could be based on, some really rich people who have some, unlimited resources, and they just can't be stimulated by any material things anymore, and it's getting to now a sick level on where they need to go to be stimulated, and they're just like similar to an addict who needs to keep getting stronger and more dangerous drugs.
The documentary on the Playboy Empire and Hugh Hefner, Playboy's Secret, really shows how progressively depraved Hugh Hefner and his friends got, to the point where they were having Linda Lovelace, who was a pornographic actress, and her boyfriend was just really vicious to her. If she dissented to on anything, he'd beat her up. He was a vicious guy, and he brought her over to the Playboy Mansion, and they had her perform bestiality with the German Shepherd. I mean, and a bunch of them watched. That's where these type of fetishes can go.
Have you ever watched the documentary Tickled? No. So it reminds me of Tickled. So Tickled was this filmmaker, this documentary filmmaker, who was kind of similar to your story, kind of just fell into this. He was just searching for something to write about, and he found this website that had these like college kids being tickled and high school kids I believe high school kids also being tickled, and it was just them giggling and laughing. And he's like, what the F is this? He's like, I don't, so he starts investigating it, and come to find out there's these kids who were given money to record these videos, and basically they were selling them and making money off it, or using, I don't know what they were doing with them, but when he was trying to uncover what was going on, come to find out these kids were being blackmailed, like the kids who didn't want to do it anymore. And they're like, we're going to send this video to everybody and upload it everywhere, and you're going to be humiliated. Because one of the one of the reasons the kids would do it is, one, they would get money, and two, they said it wouldn't be public. It would be for personal use or whatever. And so he ends up going down this rabbit hole, and he ends up getting death threats. He ends up being followed. He ends up finding out there's all these rich businessmen that are getting basically kicked out of this, and getting some sexual pleasure out of these young boys being tickled and laughing and being in their underwear. So it was kind of very similar. So it's like these weird dark places exist. It's in places that most of us don't ever go, but they do exist, and it's hard to go down those rabbit holes and talk about these things, but it's a part of our world, it's a part of our society, and if you don't talk about it and you don't attempt to expose it, it's just going to continue happening.
Well, I've been working on exposing it for 21 years, and evil is still winning. I've won some minor battles, but evil is still winning. It's America is going to have to get over its cognitive dissonance about this. I remember when I was pitching editors about the Franklin scandal, and I look into their eyes, and I could see the machinations of their thinking, and they were thinking to themselves, this is really a horrible story. You've got all these children getting abused with impunity. I should help Nick Bryant out, expose this. Or, Nick Bryant, I think he's crazy. And once that cognitive dissonance is breached, they can go home and have a nice dinner with their family. And they don't have to worry about Nick Bryant anymore, because they've concluded that Nick Bryant's crazy.
Yeah, and that's how they justify doing nothing. Yeah,
yes,
without a doubt. Yeah, I will do my best to promote your podcast. I host another
wonderful.
I host another show called The Union of the Unwanted, which is actually some people who've interviewed you are regulars on that show. I actually hosted with Charlie Robinson from Macroaggression, Sam Tripoli from the Tinfoil of Hat podcast, and Midnight Mike from the OBDM show. But it's a big kind of roundtable discussion type show, and it does very well. And Jason Burmis we actually recorded last night a episode, and Jason Burmis is a regular on there, and many regulars on there, and so I'll have to have you come on that show also to promote your book, your work, your new podcast, and for people listening, actually, let's promote that stuff now. Let's get into how people can keep up with what you're doing, how they can help, how they can get access to your books and your podcast, and anything else you want to promote.
My website is nickbryantnyc.com. And from my website, you can link to my podcast, which I started in May. And my podcast looks at these darker corners that I've been investigating for 21 years. The book, The Franklin Scandal, you can get that on Amazon if you want to buy anything on Amazon, or it's anywhere on the internet. And I also wrote Confessions of a DC Madam. Again, you can get that just about anywhere on the internet. And I've got a third book coming out in March. I hope it's March. I've been working on the writing project from hell, so I keep pushing back the publication date of that book. But it's the Truth About Watergate, a tale of extraordinary lies and liars. And I show, and this is counterintuitive, because people have been taught a lot of things about Watergate that they've been inundated with a certain story of Watergate. But at the heart of Watergate is a intelligence sexual blackmail operation. And the burglars were in the DNC. There was a secretary at the DNC, Democratic National Committee, which was in the Watergate. She had a book of prostitutes, and they were at the Columbia Plaza, which was an upscale apartment complex. And the Columbia Plaza was wired for audiovisual blackmail. And they would let Democratic big shots page through the book, and if they saw a prostitute that they liked, then they would make a call to the Columbia Plaza, and then, which was a block and a half away from the Watergate, and then that person would be compromised. And when the burglars were busted, they had a camera on top of Maxie Wells's desk, and they had the key to get into Maxie Wells's desk. So there was different agendas going on during Watergate, but definitely some of those burglars were there to get those pictures, those and any other compromising material on the Democrats.
I've done one show a long time ago in Watergate. It was actually this one with the real Watergate scandal. I honestly don't remember exactly what we hit on, but I'm pretty sure we didn't touch any of those things you just referenced. The
real Watergate scandal. Jeff Shepard, he's written some good things, but his view of Watergate is very myopic. He was in the Nixon administration, so he's coming at it from like a partisan point of view. Like I said, in my Watergate book, I cite his book a few times, but he's coming at it from he's trying to validate Richard Nixon. And for me, I'm coming at it what I believe, hopefully, is the truth. And I don't have any partisan affinities. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. Once I got into investigating this stuff, I realized that both political parties were equally corrupt. So I gave up on being a Democrat or Republican.
Yeah, I'm also politically homeless. So I'm with you. Yeah, it's I don't like picking teams. And the problem with picking teams too is that you do end up defending your team, or you ends up getting in the way of seeing truth and what's really going on. I've had Roger Stone on quite a few times in the past, and same thing. Like, can I get some really interesting information from that only somebody like him who's been in the inside can share with us? Yeah, that's awesome. But also, I have to constantly keep reminding myself, like, he's also a politician. He's a lobbyist. He has a point of view that is going to affect the information he's giving you. So he's
Roger the Dodger.
Yeah. Before you go, one thing I did want to ask and I completely forgot about was your opinion on like the Anthony Weiner laptop. Did you ever look into that, or you? Because there's a lot of people in the alternative media community talk about the police officers that investigated it and some of the things that they saw, but I haven't seen any like real strong evidence. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, if your listeners really want to find the truth out about Anthony Weiner and what actually went down there, Russ Baker's site, Who, What, Why,
Yeah, Russ has been on.
Caesar.order.com, and they've done some nice investigation on that. And I would suggest that they look at that website.
Yeah, I've been meaning to reconnect with Russ because I haven't had him on in a long time, and he was a regular back in the day. And I know he's been on your podcast, right? I think I saw his name.
He has indeed. Well, I mean, I've been on his podcast, so he's got to be on mine.
Yeah. Return the favor, absolutely. Yeah, and he's another one of those guys. Great investigative journalist, really goes into it, doesn't pick teams, and really tries to look at things right down the middle. Which I think is awesome. Family Secrets is a great book. If people have, it's probably out here somewhere, I'm sure. But that's one of those got to have books similar with the Franklin scandal that I think everybody who wants to dive deep down these rabbit holes and learn a little bit more about how the world really works they need to have it.
Generally, if you choose sides, it's going to obfuscate the truth. For me, I have to come at something just looking for the truth. I studied philosophy in college, and what I was taught vis-a-vis Socrates was to approach everything agnostically. And there's a line in the Buddhist Dhammapada that says, "A fool that knows he is a fool is, let us say, wise, but a fool who thinks he is wise is hugely a fool." And so on my best days, I know that I'm a fool, and that enables me to make reasonable decisions as far as what is true and what's not. So I try to approach everything as agnostically as I can.
Yeah, philosophy is so important. I knew I liked you for a reason. Yeah, I mean, the thing about philosophy is that it asks questions constantly, and it reminds you that not everything is black and white, and nothing really is black and white. There's different perspectives. There's different ways of looking at things, and just about every thing throughout human history, like what is right, what is wrong, like all these things, these have not been determined, and you should question everything.
As Socrates said, now I'm spacing on that quote. There we go. The unexamined life isn't worth living. That's what Socrates said. When you get old and geriatric like me, sometimes you forget some stuff.
Oh, I mess up quotes all the time, so it's only gonna get worse for me. It's all downhill from here.
But I believe that the unexamined life isn't worth living. So
I absolutely believe that too. But,
I'll go down with the ship on that one.
But thank you so much, Nick, for your time, for taking time out of your day to join us and share all your wisdom and knowledge and information that you've spent much of your life investigating and exposing. And hopefully we talk again in the near future. I'll definitely keep you in the loop in regards to the next Union of the Unwanted. Hopefully have you on one of those in the near future also, and I'll send you links to the show once it's up and live.
That would be wonderful. Have yourself a good night.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Nick. I really appreciate it. Take care.
Okay, bye.